Yes, please, thanks. All right, good morning. Welcome to the second seminar in our series on a brief history of philosophy from Heraclitus to Eccles. Today the main topic will be the great mystery revealed, Gnosticism and the origins of ancient Christianity. And then the timeline goes from the Gnostics to St. Augustine. Actually, it goes to St. Thomas Aquinas. So just as a reminder, all course materials are currently available or will be available soon for download from the website. The website is narrogatealliance.org. Right now, everything's just on the home page, and you don't have to worry about logins. Within a couple of days, I'll have everything moved to its own separate page behind this password and that user ID. So just be sure that you write that down or have access to it. This information is already contained in the course syllabus, which is available on the homepage. So you can just download that and then have that information available. Everything is in lowercase letters, and I made it as easy as I could to remember. Hi, welcome. All right, scheduling. Next week, we will be off. This particular course has a couple of different hiatuses, 1 of 3 weeks. So the first one is next week. So we will meet again on Monday, October 1st, 2012 at 9 o'clock. Yeah, so that will fit into a lot of people's schedules. All right, availability of materials. Primary materials, such as the PowerPoint presentation, are always available on the day of the seminar, so they're already out there. You can go download them, this particular PowerPoint. Other materials will be available on the Wednesday following the seminar, usually by about 6 p.m. And finally, the audio and video presentations will be available roughly within 2 weeks. I haven't quite figured out how long it's going to take me to download, edit, and do all the other things I need to do, and then re-upload them to YouTube. So it could even be longer than 2 weeks, but sooner or later I'll get everything worked out, and they'll be available very quickly. All right, just a brief note about the research synthesis. The current version of the bibliography is available. It has 4,089 entries. I've got 3 separate documents that are arranged alphabetically by author, alphabetically by publication date, and alphabetically by subject. So, just so you can have an idea of what they'll look like. Okay, this is the table of contents for the subject bibliography. So this is organized according to subject. And what I've done here is I just got the category. These are in alphabetical order. The number of entries in that category and the page number that it starts on. So you'll be able to, this is a searchable document, it's a PDF, so you'll be able to go right exactly where you want to go. So like, for example, if you come down here, right to this one, autogenic training has 25 entries and it starts on page 18. And so we can just basically page through. We'll see, like, some of them have quite a few entries, 484 here for the psychoanalysis entry, 152 for heart rate variability. There's, I think, 225 total categories, and of course that's a little bit too many. So one of the things I'll be doing between now and the next version of this is going back and consolidating categories. So then you'll just see the entries. So the first one, lacking vocal instruction, is Chuck Jones, make your voice heard, and then on and on like that. So you'll be able to see. It's a little bit easier to work with this version, because you can look at the subject you're interested in. The other ones are just, alphabetical by author or, by date and then by author. So those you'd have to know what you're looking for specifically. All right, any questions about that?
A lot of work.
Yes, yeah. It's taken quite a long time, and I'll just keep adding to this. I add about, 1,000 to 1,200 entries a year. And so, as the research synthesis continues to grow, we'll get a larger and larger tool that's available for us to go back and double check it.
So what would you do that in?
Excel, yes, yeah, the master database is in an Excel database spreadsheet, and so I've got it, I just put it in, I've got, the authors, the secondary authors, the date of publication, and then some internal documentation for the synthesis, and then, the title, the publisher, all the bibliographical information. And then if it's a book, I have the Library of Congress information, so we can go back out to the Library of Congress and cross-reference it there. If it's a journal article, I'll have the PubMed database if it's listed in PubMed, which it mostly is. So I'll have all of that information, plus all the categories that they use, Library of Congress listings. And then I have about 1,100 of them that are annotated up to this point. Ultimately, I'll get them all annotated. So there's a brief little introduction to what they're talking about. And I'll get that online next week, so you'll have the annotated version of the however many, 1,000 or whatever. So just to make it a little easier to follow all of this. And it's important that, you can tell that there is a great deal of research that's gone into the program that I presented. But it's also important to recognize that I want you to think for yourselves. Okay, what I'm trying to present is exactly what these people said with very little interpretation. So you can always go back and double check by using the bibliographies. You can always go back and check, find out, and just, find out, read it for yourself, find out exactly what it means. All right, any questions about that? Okay, so now let's review last week's seminar. Welcome, come on in, have a seat. Last week, the topic was Introduction to the Great Mysteries, Ontological Dualism and Practicing Death. All right, from the ancient mystery religions through Aristotle. So what we're looking at in this particular seminar is the single guiding principle that runs throughout the entire fabric of both Eastern and Western philosophy. This is the key to understanding everything that anybody has ever written about philosophy. Because they're talking about a single thing. They're talking about this. They're talking about the place where we live, the place that is the home of the great mystery. And they are talking about the means for solving that mystery. And they tell us specifically, in some instances, exactly what to do in order to solve the mystery. Now, in other instances, they sort of obscure it because they don't want everybody to know how to solve the mystery. And in some cases, they come right out and flat out, put it behind lock and key, so no one can get to it except a select few. That was what the ancient mystery religions were doing. They were keeping it to themselves because it was part of their power base. All right, and it still is. Everything that was going on 10,000, 15,000, 30,000, 80,000, 2.5 million years ago is still going on today. Nothing has changed. The only thing different today is that we have better technology. That's it. Otherwise, every one of these things is still being practiced. Everything that they laid down is still active, and everything that they described is still operational right now, today, this minute, for every one of us. So this is not dry, dusty, old nonsense. This is the living, breathing, current history of human thought. Okay? And what this course will do is show you the key. It will provide you the key so that you can go back and read any of these people and discover, number one, if they know what they're talking about, really quick. And number two, if they do know what they're talking about, you will be able to understand exactly what they're saying. Okay? Because they're only talking about one thing. Always. They're only talking about one thing, and that is the ontological structure of reality, which is a dualism. And we'll get to that in just a second. Okay, so the ancient mystery religions, roughly from 6000 BCE to 325 BCE. Now, the basic concepts that were laid down at that point were secret initiation rites. You had to be initiated through the secret rites in order to become a member. And that was reserved almost exclusively for the upper class, ruling class, wealthy elites and their families. They believed in consciousness-matter dualism, that there was a difference, a distinction between consciousness, what we are, and matter, this stuff and this stuff. They believe that human souls are divine, but that they require training, which is why we're here. Okay? They believed in the transmigration of the soul until the training is complete. They believed in enlightenment through discipline, and the disciplines that they had available to them are still extant today, in exactly the same form. If we could go back to 6000 BC, we would recognize everything they were doing. And if they could come forward to our time, they would also recognize it. It is the same. It is identical. Gymnastics, yoga, tai chi, athletics, all of those kinds of things on the somatic level for the body itself, hypnosis, tranquility meditation, some version of psychoanalysis, and insight meditation. So all of those modern disciplines have their origins way back when, and they look identical. They look the same. There's no difference. If we go back and take a look at what they were doing way back then, and we will, we'll see some, later on, we'll see some versions of this kind of stuff from the Golden Dawn. We will see the initiation rites. We'll see the psychology. We'll see the meditation. We'll see all of the physical stuff that they want us to do. And these are taken directly from an unbroken line of secret societies and mystery religions. So again, same thing today as it was 10,000, 2,000, 80,000, it doesn't matter. As long as humans have been around, this stuff has been going on. And this is the core of everything that we are. This explains it. Okay? The Pre-Socratics followed right after, from about 750 BCE to 469 BCE. And there's still Pre-Socratics running around today. There are still mystery religions running around today. So we had Hesiod first with his resurrection myths. We have Pythagoras, who created the terms philosopher and philosophy, lovers of wisdom. He incorporated the initiation rites and the ascetic exercises of the mystery religion into his own philosophical system, and then gave that to his students. Discovered that contemplation, what we would call meditation, allows the philosopher to experience directly the formal structures of physical objects. And he went further. He said the formal properties of physical objects in the material world can be represented by mathematical symbols and relationships. And so he proved the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. It had been around for a while, but no one had been able to offer a proof until he did. Okay, this is our famous, the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the square of the other two sides. That's what that is. Heraclitus followed almost immediately after him. He emphasized the difference between the one and the many. This was the core of his philosophical fragments. The one and the many. We will see these terms, especially this one, the one, over and over and over and over again as we go forward. Parmenides wrote a small fragmentary volume that talked about two ways, two pathways. The way of opinion, which is the way of the many, and the way of truth, which is the way of the one. And again, we'll find out a little bit more about exactly what that means today. Next came the ancient Greek philosophers. Most everybody is familiar with these. It started about 469 BCE to about 322 BCE. So Socrates was born in 469 and Aristotle died in 322. Now, Socrates, of course, wrote nothing down. Absolutely nothing. So everything we know about him comes from Plato, comes from Xenophon, comes from Aristophanes and some of the other people who were his contemporaries who wrote about him. So from the Socratic dialogues that Plato wrote, we get the following 5 elements. A philosopher practices death. This is in the Phaedo. And this is where Socrates is just getting ready to be executed by the state. He's got, a couple hours left, and so some of his students, including some young kids, students of his, 15, 16 years old, come to ask him questions about death and dying. And he basically tells them, hey, this is what we do. Philosophers practice death. You'll learn how to do this because Plato will teach you how to do all of this stuff. And so this is what it is all about, practicing death. Now, if we go back a little bit earlier and take a look at the myth structures that Hesiod had written down, and take a look at the myth structures that come out of the ancient mystery religions, we find whole bunches of resurrection myths. We find whole bunches of myths, stories about people going into the underworld and then coming back. So this is the mythological structure of what Socrates is talking about when he says a philosopher practices death. He's not being analogical. He is being quite literal. A philosopher practices death. That is the method. That is the method for separating the many from the one from the many. Okay? So, as we move forward, we'll find out a little bit more about exactly what that means. Anamnesis, which is the opposite of amnesia. So this is not amnesia. So this is remembering. Anamnesis. And basically he said, look, if we are these eternal immortal souls, then everything that we learn in this particular incarnation is something that we remember from previous experience. So this is the anamnesis. This is the remembering, the doctrine of recollection. And he used it as a proof of the existence of the transmigration of souls and the eternal nature of the soul. The theory of forms talks about the ideas. Okay, so he uses some examples, chairs, mathematical objects, things like that. That chair is a representation in physical matter of the idea of a chair. Okay, that chair and this object are related. Okay, this chair looks like that kind of a chair, but there are other kinds of chairs. How do we know the difference? How do we know that that's a chair, this is a chair, your lazy boy is a chair, the little three-pronged tripod thingy that you sit on, a director's chair. You can use a table as a chair. How do we know that these things that have different form, different actual structures, are all chairs? Because we have access to the idea. We have access to the actual universal idea, which says that these things are chairs. Okay? So again, a proof that there is something other than physical matter, and we have access to it. And it is that which determines the actual physical form of these things. The allegory of the cave basically talks about the journey of the philosopher himself. You wake up one morning and you realize, that you are you've been chained in this cave, and you're looking at the back wall. And behind you are these people. There's a big fire, and behind that fire are these people. Between the fire and your back are these people who run around with silhouettes and hand signals and everything else, and they cast shadows on the wall at which you are looking. And everybody gets involved in these things. Okay, it's sort of like television, back in the pre-television days. And so he said, this is the way most people go through their lives. They're looking at shadows. They're looking at shadows on the wall that someone else has put there. So the philosopher breaks his chains and looks around and sees that out towards the back here, beyond the fire, beyond the people, there's a light. He or she travels out there to the external world where everything is, bright and clear and the sunshine and real. And he comes back into the cave and tries to get all the people to follow him out. Say, hey, I got this cool thing I want to show you. But most of them refuse even to listen because they're too involved in the stories and in their, interpretations of what's going on the wall. So this is Plato's description of the difficulty that people have when they approach philosophy. And it's very difficult. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to understand. Okay? Also, Plato is letting us take a look at one of the mystery religion's primary initiation rituals. Okay? They would take you down deep into a dark cave, and they would do this to you. They would show this to you as part of the initiation ceremony. That was the first level initiation for the Eleusinian mysteries. So he is, by using a little bit of poetic license, he's able to tell what their ritual was without violating his vow of silence. All of the Socratic dialogues, in one way or another, describe the Augustinian mysteries, the ancient mystery religions. And they put it out there for anybody who understands what he's saying to recognize it and to learn from it. Finally, the myth of air. At the end of the Republic, Socrates talks about this huge battle that they had that he was involved with, and there was huge casualties on both sides. So that night they all went out and they gathered all the casualties together, and one of the casualties was one of his friends named Air, and so they thought he was dead. So they prepared him for burial and cremation. On the third day after that, they have him up on his funeral pyre, and they're just about ready to light the torch and send him on his way when he wakes up. He said, "Wow, welcome back. Where have you been?" And he says, "Well, I've been on the other side." And he begins to describe this. He begins to describe this place on the other side, okay, that he has now returned from. So this is what Socrates was talking about in the Phaedo. The philosopher practices death. Does exactly what air does. Travels on the other side. Socrates literally tells the young kids, he says, look, it's not a question of belief, it's not a question of faith, okay? It's not a question of faith when I say that this building here has a room with all of these chairs in it. I mean, I know that. It's not a question of faith. I can come and show you the chairs. Anybody who wants to can come and take a look at it. Not a question of faith, not a question of belief, a question of fact, because it has been determined by the actual experience of being in the room, or being out on 4th Avenue, or being, in Pocatello. So he said, I've been there. Not once, but 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, every day, a philosopher practices death. So the myth of air is describing what you find on the other side. Finally, we get to Aristotle, and there are 3 concepts that we will take forward and analyze a little later. One is his concept of substance. Next is his concept of Theos Theoreticos, which is the theoretical life, which is the life of contemplation, which is the life of the philosopher. And finally, first philosophy, the foundation of philosophy, metaphysics. The philosophy which is concerned with the science of being, the science of the one, the science of what air found, the science of practicing death. That is first philosophy. Okay? Ancient Eastern philosophy, we turn to the Buddha and the Patanjali, roughly 563 to 150 BCE. The Buddha founded everything on his recognition that this existence, that of the existence and constant reality of suffering, pain, dissatisfaction, death, disease, all of these horrible things that we encounter here in this material world. And he said, this is the first noble truth. This is the truth of suffering. You have to recognize that this place is dangerous and filled with suffering before you'll even be motivated to try to become a philosopher. And then he offered concrete operational instructions on how to practice death. So even though we get mythological things like the myth of air, and we get the allegory of the cave, and we get other sort of offhand descriptions of what a philosopher does when they practice death, we don't get a concrete description of an actual practice from the ancient Greeks. But we do get it directly from the Buddha. Because he has done exactly the same thing. He's learned these same mysteries, he's been initiated into the same pathways, he's studied the same things, and he has now returned in order to do essentially what they were trying to do, to bring it to everybody, to open up the mystery, to take the great mystery and open it up for the public. He would talk and teach to anybody who wanted to come and listen to him. It didn't matter who they were. And he would show them specifically how to practice death. Tranquility meditation, insight meditation. Yes?
What's the difference between tranquility and insight?
Functionally, there isn't a lot of difference. What happens in tranquility meditation is that the organism is placed in a state of psychophysiological coherence, which permits the consciousness that we are to detach from the organism here. And we'll discover later on, we'll talk about how this process occurs. Okay, we've actually got a model now. We've actually got a quantum theoretical model that can be tested. We have that. We haven't had that for a long time, but we have it now. We actually have a physical model using quantum mechanics, quantum math, that can be tested in the laboratory to prove this hypothesis. Yes?
So, the guy that was dead for 3 days and then woke up when they were going to burn him, you said that he told them what it was like. What did he say it was like?
He said exactly what you think it was like. Because what he said is exactly what comes to us through the Christian tradition. Exactly. There is this place called Purgatory, okay, where the souls are sort of milling around, waiting to see where they're going to go. And on the other side, there's all those people who have finished their journey here, and they're over there hanging out, and all these people are waiting to go back. And I sort of hung around and talked with people that I knew, family members who died. Okay, I wasn't allowed to go over there because I was not ready to die, so I was going to be sent back in a short time. But while I was there, I got to see everything. They showed me around and explained everything. Okay? In fact, if you take a look at the myth of air, and you take a look at Joseph Smith's description of the afterlife, it is identical, word for word. Okay? So this tradition comes forward all the way through. That's what the myth of air is. And you can go read it. It's very short. It's a very short description. But that's basically a synopsis of what he said. Okay? Any other questions about that? Now, the difference between tranquility and insight meditation. Once you have achieved a state of tranquility, then it is possible to begin to actually experience and explore the difference between the consciousness which we are and the reality of this organism here, which is constructed of physical material, and the rest of the extended universe out there. So that then leads you into the insight part of it. Because that's where everything comes together.
Is that like the subconscious?
Oh, no. No, it's not like, okay. The concept of subconscious and unconscious minds, first of all, subconscious is a ridiculous term. Okay? It's one of those popular psychology terms that just came out of nowhere. All right? And there is an unconscious and there is a conscious. There is a consciousness which you are. Now, the concept of an unconsciousness which you are is ridiculous. It's absurd. You are a consciousness. Okay? So how can there be an unconsciousness attached to that consciousness? There can't. So where does that unconscious mind arise from? There's only two things. Where can it be? What?
No, I'm just thinking.
Okay, there are two things, there are two substances to use Aristotle's term. There's the thinking substance, which we are, and there's the extended substance, this and this. So if the unconscious cannot be where we are, where does it have to be? There's only one other place it can be, because there's only two things. It has to be here, okay? This thing right here, okay, is a complex biomechanical, bioelectrical, biophysical quantum machine with 30 trillion moving parts, okay? I mean, even more than that if you count the molecular parts. But there's 30 trillion cells, individual cells in this, bioelectrical, mechanical quantum machine. It has its own intelligence, it has its own way of thinking, it has its own way of doing things, it has its own learning. The unconscious mind that we talk about in psychology resides here. Okay? It doesn't reside over here where we are. Alright? It resides here. And of course, once you begin to practice insight meditation, that becomes obvious. I mean, you'll actually feel it, you'll experience it. Again, it will be as clear to you as the sun is in the sky. So another thing to keep in mind, these people are not describing phantoms. They're not describing figments of their imagination. They are describing the world as it really is. And the reason they're able to do that is because they have practiced these kinds of technologies, these kinds of disciplines, their whole lives. And the more they practice the disciplines, the more reality becomes available to them. And so the descriptions we get are based upon practicing death. That is detaching the consciousness which we are from the physical organism of the body, which is, by definition, death. Right. Okay? And it is not mystical, it's not mysterious, it's not wondrous, it's none of those things. It's simply the proper way of behaving. Okay? Because that's what we are, and that's the nature of this reality. The fact that everybody doesn't learn this when they're 4 can be traced back to the ancient mystery religions and their desire to keep this information to themselves as a matter of control and power. Okay, it's a political decision not to train the population in these technologies, to hide them, to obscure them, to make them difficult to understand. Okay, it's a political decision. It's not because they're difficult, because they're not. It's because I don't want y'all to know about this. Because if I know it and you don't, I can do a lot of things that you can't do. I can think a lot of things that you can't think. I can go a lot of places you can't go. And that gives me a huge advantage. Especially if I'm dealing with a completely illiterate society that doesn't know anything, that only knows what I tell them. Then the advantage is like multiple. Okay, so that's a political decision which still exists to this day. Okay, so did that explain the difference between tranquility and insight meditation? Okay, again, it's a matter of, they're identical as far as what you're doing physiologically, but they're different in the sense that when you are doing insight meditation, you are discovering and exploring the difference between the two substances. Okay? Tranquility meditation sets the ground so that the two substances can detach, and then at that point, insight meditation is possible. Insight meditation is possible without entering into a meditative state. It is possible to do it. Descartes discovered how, and Husserl advanced that technology. It is possible to reason your way through this without ever entering a meditative state. So we'll find out how to do that a little later on. But the original descriptions come from these people understanding and practicing meditation. Okay? So Patanjali created he wrote he compiled the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali right around 150 BC. And so yoga, the Sanskrit word yoga, comes forward to us in our word yoke, yoking. Putting two things together in a harness, like 2 oxen or 2 horses. And what it specifically is talking about is yoking together the consciousness which we are and the physical body. That's what we're doing here. Those are the two things that are being yoked together in yoga. All right? And specifically, he talked about ascesis, asceticism, which also comes from the ancient mystery religions. Generation of heat during the yoga practice. That's what asceticism technically means. You generate heat. So those of you who practice yoga know what I'm talking about because you felt that heat. All right? And that's what the objective is, because if you can generate the heat, you can enter into a meditative state and separate consciousness from that, which is what this is all about. If we are locked into this, we are in for a world of pain and suffering. Because this thing right here is, at some point in the future, going to decay and die in a horrible, painful, slow, miserable way. And if we're linked to it, if we're locked in there, we're going to experience every nanosecond of that decay. Okay? So this is no joke important. Because if we can learn how to do this, if we can follow their instructions, and we can learn how to do this, it won't matter. It will not matter to us, because this thing right here is designed, in fact, to stop working at some point and to decay back into the material. We're eternal. Okay? We're untouchable. The consciousness which we are is literally eternal, immortal, non-physical, non-local, and partakes of none of these kinds of things. Okay? And so once we learn how to do these things, then death no longer holds any fear for us. Because we practice it every day. We practice it all the time. And once you are standing on that firm, solid ground, the ground of what consciousness is, then everything here becomes
An abstract, right?
not abstract, but less serious. Okay? Sartre will talk about two basic attitudes: the spirit of seriousness, which we must adopt if we're locked to this place. I mean, if we're going to experience the decay and ultimate dissolution of this organism here, that's tragic. Okay? So that then becomes the spirit of seriousness, where we're weighed down by all of this stuff. But on the other side is the spirit of play. And meditation and these other technologies that are available to us provide us the opening for that spirit of play. Okay? The spirit of seriousness is weighed down by consequences. I have to worry about the consequences of everything I do and everything that everybody else does. But the spirit of play relieves us of that fear of consequence, because there are no consequences. Not to the immortal consciousness which we are. Okay? And again, those are not just words. They are actual descriptions of a real ontological fact, which any of you can experience yourselves by following this path. The path of the one, not the path of the many. Okay? And we'll get back to that. All right, just so we're talking, so we have a common vocabulary. Modern philosophy uses this among other classification schemes. This is the one I like because it's the simplest. So we have 5 branches: metaphysics, epistemology, logic, ethics, and aesthetics. Metaphysics is divided into 4 basic branches. Okay, ontology. Metaphysics is the theory of being. Remember, it's first philosophy. It is the science of being, of the two beings, to be particular, the two substances, and how they interact. Okay? The world of being, which we occupy as immortal souls, and the world of becoming, which is all that stuff out there. And so ontology is concerned with the nature of reality. So when I say something is ontological, I mean it is real. Okay? Teleology talks about the purpose of reality. What is the purpose of all of these things? Cosmology talks about the origin and structure of reality. This has largely been replaced by modern astronomy, physics, chemistry. And soteriology, which is salvation in the midst of reality. Soteriology is sort of putting it all together and saying, wow, we have to practice these things because that is the only way we're going to be able to save ourselves from the disaster which awaits us in the world of becoming. Epistemology is the theory of knowledge. How do we know anything? That didn't come about until right around the 1600s, 1700s with Descartes, following Descartes. Prior to that was all metaphysics, but after Descartes, it became obvious that we needed to have a theory of knowledge as well, and we'll see why in a couple of weeks. Logic is the theory of meaning, reason, and language. Language reflects the structure of reality. Okay, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. All right, and the word in the ancient Greek is logos, logic. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. That's what logic is. Logic is talking about the theory of meaning, the theory of structure, the theory of reason, and the theory of how language reflects the structure of being. Okay, ethics is the theory of proper conduct. Given all of these facts, what is the proper conduct for a philosopher? And finally, aesthetics, the theory of beauty. What is it that the philosopher seeks? The philosopher seeks the good and the beautiful. Okay? But in order to do those things, we have to have a theory. We have to be able to define good and beautiful. All right. So, discussion of that. What is the meaning of enlightenment with reference to the great mystery? A few guiding questions. What is the great mystery? Anybody? What are we? Where do we come from? Where do we go? What is this place? Okay, so that's the great mystery. Because we arrive here, sort of thrust into the middle of things, and mostly those questions are not answered in a satisfactory way. We are given answers to those questions, but the answers are provided by people who do not tell us how to go find the answers on our own. Okay. What does it mean to be enlightened?
So it could be that is enlightenment can be applied to different ways of vision, of knowledge, of let me see. Try to translate what I'm saying. It's like an extra vision of things. Won't be that?
It's really simple. Given what we know now about the nature of reality, that there's these two substances, and that they interact in some way, okay, what does it mean to be enlightened? According to the classical definition of that. Okay, so what is the simplest operational definition? A person who is enlightened is someone who has managed, by practicing the discipline, to actually affect the separation of the consciousness which they are. So that's the definition of someone who's enlightened. Okay? So how would you know if you are enlightened? That's the next question. How would you know if someone else was enlightened? That's a very important question. Because there's a lot of people out there claiming to be enlightened. They're claiming to have the truth, and they're claiming to have the path, and they'll give it to you if you only give them lots and lots of money. Okay? How would you test someone who claimed to be enlightened? And how would you demonstrate your own enlightenment to someone else? Those are the questions that we'll answer by the end of the course. Okay? Because we will have gone through some of the exercises, especially those people in the hypnosis class and the meditation class. We will actually be practicing this stuff. All right? For those of you who are only in this class, we will be practicing the Cartesian method and the phenomenological method. So we don't need to do meditation. We don't need to do hypnosis. We can just practice phenomenology. That will arrive at the same exact place. Okay? So there are multiple ways of getting to this enlightened state. All right. So now, we're about ready to go into the material for today's seminar, The Great Mystery Revealed, Gnosticism and the Origins of Ancient Christianity. So we'll be looking at the Gnostics, from the Gnostics to St. Thomas Aquinas, about 325 BCE to 1274 CE. All right. Any questions before I go on? I'll go and change the tape. Yeah.
2 screens ago, you were talking about a person's consciousness, and worrying about being having guilt or conscience for other people?
No. Not conscience. We're not talking about guilt. Guilt is a function of this organism. Okay, there's a specific pathway in the nervous system that, under certain circumstances, creates the feelings of guilt. Guilt and shame. Okay, and there's an actual pathway here. It's specifically designed into this organism. Okay, it has an evolutionary function. Okay, the consciousness which we are cannot feel guilt. Okay? There's no need to feel guilt. All right, It has no need to feel shame. It has no need to feel any of those things. It doesn't feel any of those things. You do not feel any of those things. The organism that you occupy does, and you then experience what it feels. Okay? Now I know this is why it is so difficult. This is why it is so very difficult. Because it is as close to you as you are, but it is very difficult to grasp without going through the process, without actually going through the meditative state. However, we can simplify it a little bit. Okay? Raise your hand. Just raise your hand and move it around. Okay? Who's doing that? Who is doing that? You are. The consciousness which you are is making that arm move. Who is thinking?
You are.
You are. The consciousness which you are is manipulating the nervous system of this organism. Thinking. You are doing all of those things. Okay? So now you have to get to know that who you are. Okay? And we'll get to that in just a second too. Okay, I realize it's complex, and I realize it's very difficult at the beginning.